Never stop reading Bible. All right, today we're jumping into a really intense ancient text, one that lays out some of a society's most fundamental rules. We're going to explore this incredible series of commands that covers, well, everything, from massive public festivals and really personal promises, all the way to the pretty brutal realities of a divinely ordered war. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We're breaking down 3 chapters that, at first glance, might seem totally different, but you'll see how they're connected. We'll start with the laws for community worship. Then we'll zoom in on these deeply personal pledges. And we'll wrap up with a really stark story about military conquest and what happens next. So first up, we've got chapter 29, which is all about sacred festivals. This really is the foundation of their community life. Think a whole series of super-structured, mandatory religious events, all crammed into one single really important month. And the timing here, it's absolutely key. You've got these 3 huge festivals all packed into the 7th month, and that was totally on purpose. See, this month was like the end of the farming year and the start of the new one. It was a natural break in the work, which meant, everyone was actually around to take part. Now, if you look at the instructions for these festivals, you'll see they are incredibly specific. I mean, they list the exact number of animals for sacrifices and everything. And the text is pretty clear that this was intentional. The whole point was to make sure there was, complete and total obedience, that worship was done exactly by the book, with 0 room for error. Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 30. We're shifting gears here, going from these huge community festivals and zooming way in, right down to the individual. This part is all about the personal promises and oaths someone could make directly to God. And what you really have to get here is how serious a vow was. We're not talking about a casual promise. This was a rock-solid, unbreakable oath made to God. The basic rule was super simple. If you make a vow, you keep it, period. And this is where you start to see the social structure of the time really clearly. The text lays out 2 different sets of rules, and it's all based on gender. So for a man, if he made a vow, it was absolutely binding. He had to follow through, no exceptions. But for a woman, her vow was conditional. It actually needed the approval of a male authority figure, so her father or her husband, to even be considered valid. So you can see the hierarchy pretty plainly here. A father could basically cancel a vow made by his unmarried daughter, and a husband could do the exact same thing for his wife. Now, the reason the text gives for this is interesting. It says these rules weren't just about social control. They were meant to highlight just how important absolute faithfulness to God was. It also put the responsibility for a wife's pledges squarely on her husband. And now, things take a really dramatic turn. In chapter 31, we shift completely away from personal and community laws and into a raw, intense story of war. We're talking about a military campaign that's ordered as an act of divine vengeance. So why this war? What was the reason? Well, according to the text, the charge was that the Midianites had led the Israelites astray, into idolatry. And because of that, a divine command came down, annihilate them. It was framed as an act of vengeance for God. The campaign plays out in a very clear, step-by-step way. First, there's the command to go to war. Then comes the attack, where the Israelite forces kill all the Midianite men and capture the women, children, and all their stuff. But then, a second, even harsher order is given. Execute all the male children and all the women who were not virgins. After that, the soldiers and all the spoils of war had to go through a cleansing ritual, and only then was the plunder divided up. Now, after this incredibly brutal campaign, the text reports a really striking statistic. The number of Israelite casualties? 0. According to this account, not a single soldier was lost in the fight. And that detail is absolutely crucial for what happens next. So, because they came back without a single loss, the military commanders were just overcome with gratitude. They saw it as divine protection. And so, in response, they voluntarily gave a special thank offering, and it came directly from their own personal share of the gold they'd captured. All right, so let's zoom back out. What are the big takeaways from this pretty intense journey through law, society, and war? Let's try to connect the dots. What we've really seen is a clear progression, right? It starts big, with the entire community focused on structured worship. Then it zooms in to the family and the individual, where social order is defined by personal oaths. And finally, it pans all the way back out to the national level with a story of divine war and retribution. And all of this leaves us with a really challenging question, doesn't it? What we have here is a world where these incredibly profound, detailed acts of worship exist right alongside very rigid social codes and, frankly, commands for brutal violence. It really makes you think, how are we supposed to interpret ancient texts that contain these massive, complex contradictions all sitting side by side?
Thanks so much for joining me for this breakdown. All the material for this explainer came from the Center Studio.